Yes, sir.
Okay, I see one raised hand. Can we deal with that real quick? Marcy has her hand raised. I think staff has unmuted you. You'll need to unmute yourself. I see you have a hand raised. Did you have a question before we start? Oh, her hand went away. So I guess she doesn't have anything. Thank you. I'll go ahead and do my intro. This is the October 24th, 2024 hearing for case number Z0339-24, an application for by Verizon for a cell tower on Steiner Road. My name is Joe Turner. I'm the county's hearings officer. I'll start with brief announcements and a summary of the process that will follow so everyone understands how you participate in the hearing today. I start by saying I'm not a county employee. I'm licensed as an attorney and trained as a planner. I serve under contract at the Board of County Commissioners. I say that so you know you're getting a somewhat independent review of the application before me today. My role as the hearings officer is to conduct public hearings and make decisions about certain land use matters in Clackamas County. In making those decisions, I'm required to apply the county's existing laws. I'm not a policymaker. I don't have the authority to vary from or change the laws. If you think that the laws need to be changed, you can work with Board of Commissioners and Planning Commission to do that. But state law requires that this application be judged based on the laws in effect when the application is filed. On that issue, there were some concerns raised about the health effects of EMF radiation from this cell tower, but federal law prohibits the county from considering those impacts when evaluating an application. So I understand the concerns. I cannot consider them because federal law prohibits that. As a hearings officer, I am to provide an unbiased decision maker, and I believe I am unbiased with regard to this application. I haven't had any pre-hearing contact with any of the parties regarding the substance of the application, and I don't have any interest in the subject property or any of the surrounding properties. But anyone has the right to challenge my impartiality, argue that I'm biased in one way or another, and you can do that when it's your opportunity to testify. Procedure will follow. I'll start by asking staff to summarize their staff report, copies of which are available on the county's website. Then the applicant will have an opportunity to present their proposal and respond to the staff report. If anybody else wants to testify in support of the application, they may do so. And then anybody who wants to testify in opposition or with questions or concerns. That should cover everybody who wants to say something about this application. You fall into one of those categories. Once everyone's had an initial opportunity to testify, I will give staff and the applicant the opportunity to respond to the new testimony. If those responses include any new evidence, I will give everyone a chance to respond to the new evidence. Otherwise, I'll close the public portion of the hearing and announce what I'm going to do. Generally, I will issue a written decision within about 2 weeks after the close of the record. I will send my decision to the county. The county will send it to parties of record. So anybody who testifies orally or in writing before the close of the record will be sure and receive a copy of my decision when it's issued. If you choose not to testify but want to receive a copy of my decision, you can contact staff and ask to be put on the list, and you'll be sure and receive a copy. Anyone with an interest in this application may offer relevant oral or written testimony, but testimony should be relevant to the applicable approval criteria which are set out in the staff report. Also, it's important that all parties make their best case to me. My decisions are final for purposes of the county, but may be appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals, or LUBA. However, LUBA generally will not allow new testimony and evidence on appeal. They'll decide any appeal based on the record before me. So if you feel it's important that myself or any future decision maker knows something about this application, you need to make sure it gets into the record before me. In order to preserve your right to appeal, you or someone expressly representing you must testify orally or in writing before the close of the record. And in order to raise an issue on appeal, someone must have raised that issue before me with enough specificity that everyone can understand what that issue is. In addition, if the applicant wants to object to any conditions of approval on constitutional grounds, they must raise those issues before me as well. If anyone feels they need more time to prepare, they can ask me to hold the record open or continue the hearing. If I hold the record open, you'll have the opportunity to submit additional written testimony and evidence before I make a decision. If I continue the hearing, we can come back and do this again at a later date. Whether or not the hearing is continued or the record is held open for any other purpose, state law requires that I hold the record open for an additional week for the applicant alone to submit a final written argument without any new evidence. The applicant can waive that right if they choose, but if anybody else wants me to hold the record open for any other purpose or to continue the hearing, they must make that request before the close of the hearing today. Also, my decisions must comply with state law that requires that I issue a final written decision within 150 days after the application was filed. So there's some limit to how long I can hold the record open or continue the hearing. When you testify, please begin by stating your name and your full mailing address. Please spell your last name if it's not listed on the screen, so I get it right. And if you represent someone else, please say so. As I said, testimony must be relevant to the applicable approval criteria in the staff report. Also, please don't repeat testimony offered by yourself or earlier witnesses. This is not a popularity contest. Whether everybody loves it or everybody hates it is not an issue I get to consider. The only issue before me is whether the application does or does not comply with the approval criteria. So repeating your testimony doesn't make your case any stronger. That concludes my introduction. Staff will go over the technical issues of how to indicate your desire to participate in this Zoom hearing. Ms. Field.
All right, so this public hearing will be conducted virtually using the Zoom platform. Panelists for today's hearing, which include the hearings officer, county staff, and the applicant, have both audio and video capability. Audience members who have joined the meeting will have their mics muted unless they wish to testify, in which case they will be called upon to do so by the county staff moderator. Audience members' video will not be turned on at any time. Today's hearing is being recorded as required by law. The county will make every effort to post the recording on the county website later today. The website it will be posted at is the hearings officer website, where the link to join today's meeting was found. There is a designated time during the hearing when it will be open for testimony. The hearings officer will make it clear when this is. If you want to provide testimony, you will utilize the raise hand feature. Attendees on PC and iPad, the raise hand button is in the Zoom bar at the bottom or top of your device. When the moderator switches you over to provide testimony, your screen will look different for a little while. Primarily, you will see all the participants' cameras, not just the one who is speaking. Staff will call upon you when it is time for you to provide testimony. Be sure to provide your name and mailing address when you begin. Once you have provided your testimony, your mic will be muted and your screen will be returned to normal. If the record is left open at the end of this hearing and you wish to submit additional written testimony, email the written testimony to jfields@clackamas.us or mail it to Clackamas County Planning and Zoning Division at 150 Beaver Creek Road, Oregon City, Oregon 97045. The staff contact email address is also available on the webpage where you found the Zoom link for today's hearing. Testimony must be received by 4 p.m. on the day the record closes. People who testify and provide their mailing address will receive a copy of the hearings officer's written decision. If you do not wish to testify but would like to receive the decision, you must provide your email or standard mailing address by emailing it to the staff contact for the application. That is myself, Joy Fields, at jfields@clackamas.us, or by entering it in the Zoom chat function during the hearing.
Okay, you going to do your staff report?
I will, yes. As the hearings officer said, we are here today to hear about the file Z0339-24 that is for a new telecommunication tower. Vertical Bridge and Verizon Wireless proposed to install antennas and associated equipment on a 195-foot tall self-support tower. Equipment and cabinets and a generator will be placed at the ground level, surrounded by a site obscuring chain link fence with a area of the lease being 75 by 75 feet. Since the staff report was issued, we have received a letter of support from the community planning organization if the tower is disguised as a tree. We have received testimony in opposition, which was one letter that discussed property values and health concerns with 17 signatures on that letter. And generally, the opposition to the tower that has been received in the testimony were from fire, health impacts, property values, and wildlife impacts. Additionally, since the staff report was issued, the Department of State Lands responded to a wetland land use notice and said that there is no specific concern about the proposed project, but that best management practices would be needed to ensure that no sediment or habitat degradation occurred in Abernethy Creek, which is on the far side of the property away from the tower. An overview of the proposal is that the tower is proposed at 18133 South Steiner Road. The property is over 200 acres in size and it is zoned timber. The tower is proposed in the northwestern part of the property. And in that timber zoning district, towers are type 2 wireless telecommunication towers are a conditional use. The site is appropriate for the use as required by 120303 because the proposed location avoids the areas of the property that contain steep slopes, landslides, and significant water resources. The road that is being proposed to the tower will be utilized by very few cars, primarily for maintenance issues and construction. And the 75 by 75 compound does not substantially limit other properties or uses in the area. It is also not on the very tip top of the topography here. And so staff anticipate that the tower will be shielded a little bit by not being on the very top of the hill. The photo simulations provided by the applicant show the forested area. They hyperimpose the base of the tower to show the site obscuring fence and the tower that's proposed. And they provided us with an example of what it could look like from off of the property when the tower is constructed from different angles. In the application, the applicant identified goals and policies of the comprehensive plan that were met. The ones that I included in the staff report include Chapter 3, Chapter 4, and Chapter 7. In Chapter 4, the applicant indicated that the project adhered to the land use policies by selecting a site that was appropriately zoned and compatible with surrounding land uses. The facility design complies with all zoning regulations and integrates seamlessly in the existing landscape, minimizing visual impact and maintaining the character of the area. That comes into play with the community planning organization's request to have the tower disguised as a monopole fir. Because if the design is a monopole fir, then it may integrate better into the landscape. The proposed tower is in a location where there are no other towers that are constructed that could support the additional antennas. It's in an area with marginal and poor service. And all of the existing towers are more than a mile away from the search area to provide better service in the area that was identified as having marginal and poor service. In the application, the applicant requested to use the existing timber around the site as landscaping. In section 835 of the zoning development ordinance that specifically talks about telecommunication towers, it identifies that the landscaping should reflect the natural vegetation of the area. However, it's also subject to ZDO 1009 that requires that the landscaping screen the compound. And with the concern over fire, staff would recommend that there be a condition of approval that matches the primary safety fuel-free area around structures. In 406 of the zoning code, the primary fuel-free break area is specifically for homes. However, it is geared towards reducing the potential for fire and reducing fire spread. In the staff report, I used the secondary fuel-free area to inform the description of the landscape area outside of the compound. After reconsidering the testimony provided, I think it may be more appropriate to use the primary fuel-free area that is actually 30 feet and use the fence area as that starting point for the 30 feet. So staff, you'll see later on, would recommend extending that landscape area to be 30 feet instead of 25 feet, and to include thinning of the trees to provide a 15-foot separation between the trees to reduce fire jumping from tree to tree, in addition to the pruning and other fuel debris removal or debris removal to reduce fuel. Since the staff report, the applicant provided a site plan that was approved by the fire department, indicating that the fire access is adequate to serve the local fire department that would be answering any calls regarding fire. And staff found that the proposal was compliant with 1015 of the zoning development ordinance regarding parking. Other standards that come into play are the lighting standards. The applicant is not proposing any outdoor lighting of the facility unless it's required by the FCC. Erosion control, as I mentioned, it's not specifically in any of the buffer zones around protected streams. However, because of the concern for salmonoid habitat in Abernathy Creek, best management practices are recommended by the Department of State Lands and staff. 1007 roads was reviewed by the Transportation and Engineering staff, and they found that the proposed access road is adequate to serve the use. And staff did not think that the proposed use of a telecommunication tower would generate trash and recycling, and found that 1021 was irrelevant or not applicable. As discussed, staff recommend approval of this land use application since the criteria was met. However, there are a couple of modifications to the specific conditions of approval that staff would recommend that the hearings officer consider, including the mono fir tower design requested by the CPO and the modified landscape condition to match the primary fuel-free break area standards in 40608 A1A. As discussed, any testimony or request for a copy of the decision can be sent to myself, Joy Fields at jfields@clackamas.us. And with that, that concludes my staff presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Fields. Do you have some proposed language for those additional conditions, or can you provide that if?
I can.
Okay.
Yes, I can provide that to you before the close of the day.
That'd be
Or
great.
before 4 p.m. today. Yeah.
Oh, your topography plan that you showed, that had some colors on it. What are those colors indicating? I assume it's steep slopes or landslide or something, but I don't know which one's which.
I will go back to that and explain it
Yeah.
for you. So that you are fully aware of what it is. So the yellow area identifies the subject property. So the yellow does not mean any environmental overlays are there. The brown areas indicate data from Dogami that indicates landslide hazards or scarps have occurred in that vicinity. And then the blue lines are potential waterways.
Okay. Thank you. It was a yellow. I couldn't figure out what that was, but it makes sense that it's the site.
It is the
on
property
this map,
highlighted.
can you point to roughly where the tower that?
It's roughly about in here.
Okay, thank you. That's what I thought, but I was a little farther
Yeah.
north than you're showing. Thank you. I think that was the only questions I had.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you, Ms. Fields. The applicant's opportunity to testify. Whoever wants to go first.
Thank you. I will attempt to share my screen here. I have a short presentation as well.
Okay. And can you give us your name and address and who you represent?
Yes, absolutely. My name is Brandon Clower, and I'm with Capital Design Services. And we represent both Vertical Bridge and Verizon Wireless. Okay, having a hard time getting the share to activate here. Maybe my colleague could see if she could, Monica, can see if you can get yours to share.
Yes, 1 second.
I'll speak to it.
Can you see the
Yes.
presentation?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Just let me know when you want to skip slides.
Sure, will do. Just a real quick clarification. So we worked on the design, and we are also leasing, zoning, permitting consultants for both companies, Vertical Bridge and Verizon Wireless. Verizon Wireless kicked off the project with a network need. Vertical Bridge is the proposed tower owner. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, I just wanted to give an overview of, clarify exactly where this is with a Google Earth overlay. And as you can see, the proposed location is located within a heavily treed area, and and that is the screening that we discussed earlier. You can go ahead, switch. I mentioned Verizon Wireless started the project with a network need. This is one snapshot taken from the RF justification that was submitted in our application, just to provide some visual representation of the wireless signal in the area. So in this image, the left before and after is on the right, and it's going to show that areas with great signal for wireless reception are indicated in the darker orange color, and the lighter orange color is going to indicate good reception. Then you have light blue indicates moderate, and by purple you have basically little to no wireless reception. And you can see this project, from what I've been told, actually started with looking at the Mampana Reservoir area, which is indicated in the box up towards the top of the image, where Verizon had received both complaints and poor test results when analyzing the data in that area. And in looking for a solution, the after with our proposed location not only bumps that signal up from being unreliable to being good and excellent, but it also takes care of the larger hole in coverage, which is to the southeast of the original intended area, providing much needed service to additional areas as well. So there are multiple solutions and fixes that this site would implement into the network. Go ahead. I wanted to reiterate that the first thing that we do when we are addressing a network need is we look for opportunities to utilize existing infrastructure. Are there existing cell towers in the area that we could utilize to not have to build a new one? And the closest one to this area is 1.7 miles to the southwest, and then the next closest is over 2 miles to the northwest. Neither of these sites were going to provide any benefit to the areas that were poor in service. So those were not able to be used. We also looked for additional options such as water towers, tall buildings, anything that could be utilized other than building a new tower. And those were kind of one by one eliminated as being available. Okay, go ahead. Okay, this is our overall site plan. Wanted to elaborate on one thing. The site plan shows the tower location up there towards the top. The tower was located, and we'll see it a little bit better in a minute, but utilizing an existing clearance that was already in there. And then the access road, which is quite a long access road, the majority of which already exists. So there would be, we did all of this to minimize the impact of the development of the area. And so there's only a section at the very kind of latter part of getting to the facility that is a new road. The rest of it is utilizing existing. And we just tried to minimize the amount of tree clearing and overall development that would be needed. You can go ahead to the next one. Okay, we saw this in the previous presentation as well. This is our site plan. Would like to point out that both for to address requirements and also as kind of we have made the tower co-locatable. So not only are we planning for Verizon Wireless to be able to use it, but if additional carriers need to use the site, then the site would be available. There is space accounted for within the fenced perimeter for additional carriers. And the tower is constructed at a height and also in a design to be able to be sufficient to add additional carriers. The reason that this is a good idea is so that we can limit the total number of towers that need to be built in an area. So we want to be as efficient as possible. Okay. Okay, here's the elevation view of what we're proposing, which is a self-support lattice tower. And it's 195 feet with a short lightning rod at the top, which goes to 199. Verizon Wireless's equipment would be at the top level there, which would be at approximately 190 feet. We've indicated on the tower where additional carriers could deploy equipment in the next levels down. But again, this application is just for single carrier at the moment. So the request was heard this morning for a different design, and I'll address that more in a moment. But right now, this is our proposed design. Go ahead. Okay, and would like to offer up one clarification earlier when it was said that the RF health and safety testimony would not be considered in the decision. I would like to clarify one thing, that it's not that it was not considered, at least on this end. There's very specific health and safety guidelines on RF emissions, and that is set by the FCC. And we have included in our application a report showing that this proposed site is safe with FCC standards in mind, and showing that while providing better service, there's no health effects from that at all. And I've included, if you want to go to the next slide, one snapshot from that report when we're talking about RF areas that are safe. Everything that is basically indicated as white or with no color in this map is an area that meets the FCC guidelines for being safe for the general public. So that means that anywhere on the ground, and actually even climbing the trees, there's no exceeding any limit set by the FCC as going into something that would have any potential health effects. So you have the only area that has anything over 100% of the allotted area of RF emissions is 190 feet in the air directly in front of the antennas, and that only goes out for 92 feet. So I just wanted to provide that clarification and just let everyone know that this is, Verizon takes RF safety very seriously, and this report has been run by a third party, verified, and meets all the criteria. Go ahead. I don't think we need to see these again. These are the full simulations that were covered earlier.
Okay, so this is the remaining slide.
Okay, thank you. And then lastly, I just want to say that the benefits of having this site, you're going to have better connectivity for the residents and businesses around. And there's also, when we're talking about safety, there's the public safety aspects of being able to access 911, emergency alerts, natural disasters, etc., and just providing the infrastructure that can serve the community both today and in the future, with additional access for people that are increasingly using wireless for working, for educational purposes, for telehealth services, etc. So it's really just trying to improve that service for the residents in the area. And I think we've taken care to minimize any potential impacts to the environment and visual as we've presented. And that's what I have. Thank you.
Mr. Flower. Anything further from the applicant?
No.
Okay. You said you wanted to talk about the monopole stealth tower.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Yes. Yes, I do. That request was just received right prior to the meeting this morning, and we immediately reached out to several folks regarding the feasibility of this. We have some significant concerns about the feasibility of doing switching from a self-support lattice tower to what we would call a monopine or monofir fake tree. After speaking with an engineer, the monopine sites are typically max out in the 160 to 165 foot height range, and certainly not above 180. What we're dealing with are trees that are approximately anywhere from 125 foot to 150 foot all around the site. For the site to be effective, I mean, first, our RF justification is based on the 200-foot height. So any lowering of how high Verizon can go reduces the amount of coverage benefit that's going to happen. And secondly, it does need to stay above the trees, not only for Verizon, but for us to meet the requirements of the site to be effective for being able to support additional carriers. Any lowering of this site would be pushing equipment down into the trees where it is less effective. So the reason there's structural concerns on trying to get a monopine that high, branches add a significant amount of loading. And as far as adding branches to a self-support tower, those towers are not designed to have those loads put on it. And this is, I'm paraphrasing from the engineer we spoke with, since I'm not an engineer, but that I would also like to just say, for us to get any kind of written testimony on this behalf, I think it might be, we might request that the record be held open so that we can get something from the engineer to specifically address those issues.
I'm happy to do that. One clarification, you said the self-supporting tower is not designed for branches. You mean the lattice style as opposed to a monopole that
Correct.
Okay.
The lattice
Just wanna
style.
make sure
It uses smaller steel members that
Sure.
are not designed to have the twisting that a potential stress from wind and that kind of thing would impose on them.
No, that makes sense. I just wanted to make sure I understood what you meant by self-supporting, what you proposed there, where it's kind of a lattice ship style.
Exactly. Thanks for that clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Clower. I don't have any further questions. Is there anybody who'd like to testify in support? I see one raised hand. If you want to testify in support, great. If not, can you lower your hand unless you have a question? In which case we'll address that when we get to opposition testimony. If whoever had their hand raised wants to testify in opposition, go ahead and raise your hand again. But all the hands are still there. Diane Brown is the first one I have. And I think staff has unmuted you. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Hi, can you
There
hear
we
me?
go. Yep,
Hi.
can now.
So I'm in opposition, but I have a couple of questions.
Okay, let's deal with your questions and then can we hold your testimony and we'll come back to you when it's opposition time.
Okay,
Thank you.
so you are saying that people are needing, you were talking about the area that's going to help people get better cell service. Most of the area around here is down in a canyon. So how does putting a cell tower in there help get reception down into the canyon?
Okay, I'll have the applicant respond to that when we come back to their testimony.
And also one other question I have is you were talking about putting the road in there. There is a heritage marker in there, and it's near that road that you're planning to use. There's also a giant oak tree in there that should be listed as some kind of, heritage tree. And I'm wondering, are you planning to cut that lovely tree down, or are you going to go around it?
Okay, I'll let the applicant respond. When you say a heritage marker, I have an idea of what you mean, but I want to make sure my idea is consistent with what you're saying.
There was some marker placed in the ground about 150 feet from the oak tree.
Okay, somebody else is speaking. Can I get your name too as well?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name's Phil Brown.
Phil? Brown?
Yep.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr.
And it
Brown.
was, it said it was a historic site.
Okay, and that's on the site somewhere?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's what I assumed you meant, but wanted to make sure. I see those all over the place. But again, want to make sure I had the same concept in mind. Thank you, Mr. and Ms. Brown. We'll come back to you when we get to opposition testimony. Can you click on the raise your hand button for now? Rick Thomas indicates, has their hand raised for testimony and support. Go ahead,
Yes,
Mr. Thomas.
thank you. Yep, looks like I'm active. My name is Rick Thomas. I live at 21121 South Mountain Meadow Road and was in the notification ring, got a letter about the project. So thank you to the county and hearings officer for the opportunity to testify. Support the project. Thank Vertical Bridge Verizon for bringing it forward, and feel the application, meets the criteria, and just in my, neighborly review of it and whatnot. I'm not a Verizon customer, but I do have many friends and relatives who visit, who are and have expressed that they have weak coverage in the area, and so I appreciate the effort to enhance coverage, especially in rural communities. I know can sometimes struggle. As a homeowner who previously lived in an area that had weak coverage, I know that affects resale value and can make resale of homes difficult. And so, having another provider with good coverage in the area, I feel will hopefully continue to enhance resale values in the area. The tower, my mind at least, looks similar to others that are in our area, at least nearby rural parts of our area. And also appreciate the county's consideration of fire risk in the region, the additional recommendations there. And then finally, just one other comment, and that's appreciate the fact that the site does have backup power. We're in an area that loses power quite regularly, sometimes for a week at a time, like in the last ice storm. Or second to last ice storm, as well as internet goes down. And so having that tower with a backup generator, I think will enhance quality of life, including during emergencies, and ability to stay connected in those times. So again, appreciate the opportunity to register my opinion and support for the project.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Anybody else want to testify in support? Not seeing any. Anybody, whoever wants to testify in opposition can now raise your hand, and we'll go back to Ms. Brown and Mr. Brown, since they had the first hand up. Can we promote them, and then they can unmute themselves? Are the Browns unmuted?
I have Barbara Markwell.
Okay, okay, that's fine. Let's go with Barbara Markwell. Can you state your name and address, please?
My name is Barbara Markwell, spelled Markwell. I reside at 17620 South Steiner Road.
Okay.
For the record, I submitted a letter in opposition to this proposed tower that was signed by 35 of us who live within the area. I submitted it on this past Monday. And
I think I've seen that.
It was scanned into the record. Just for the record, there were 35 signatures on that letter. I have to admit, I'm exceedingly disappointed that you're unable to take health standards into consideration. In my research, I found the FCC set the regulations in 1996. That's 27 years ago, and they have not been updated since. Rolled out 5G without any testing on and any studies to determine possible health effects to any living creatures, human or otherwise, during that time. And although you're not considering it, I do want to throw out in there for the record that there are multitude of studies that have demonstrated serious health effects, including cancer, among other things.
I understand that, but it's not something I get to consider. Because the
Yeah.
federal government has decided that these standards that they've set are adequate to protect human health, and that's their determination. I have no authority to reconsider that, and I can't consider it in this process.
So so basically, I guess I want to register A, my opposition, and B, it sounds like even though the county, through the Federal Telecommunications Act of 1996 gave you the authority to decide where things go, it sounds like it's a done deal.
If it meets the criteria, there are additional criteria. It's just that one concern that I can't address.
Right.
There are criteria in the code that are set out in the staff report that this has to meet. And if it meets those, I have to approve it. If it doesn't meet those, I have to deny it. That's the issue, is whether it meets those or not. But I understand you want health issues considered, but I cannot do that.
Can we consider, or can you consider effects to the abundant wildlife in the area, and that people use that area through the for recreation?
Not the people that are using it, and I don't believe it allows me to consider wildlife impacts either. You have raised that. I read that in your written testimony. I'm going to look at the language of the federal regulations that prohibit consideration of health effects. I don't think it's limited to human health effects. I think it's just health effects, period, which would cover wildlife and plants as well. I think you mentioned consider that study regarding impacts to trees. So I'll look at that, and I will, if I find that it's something I can consider, I will. But you have raised that issue clearly, so I will consider it.
Okay, well, my biggest concerns are in the areas that you're
I understand.
unable to address. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McGraw. Joseph Hayden is next. The Browns, your hand isn't down. I'm not sure if you decided your issues have been addressed or not. Just want to let you know. Okay, the hands are back up. We'll come to you next. Joseph Hayden.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you all for your time today. My name is Joseph Hayden. I'm here with my wife, Bernadette. We live at 17323 South Steiner Road. We're about 3/4 of a mile from the proposed build site. I've had Verizon as my carrier previously. I had perfectly adequate connection and cell service for the time that I lived here. I'm no longer with Verizon just because of other business practices, and I switched over to another provider, T-Mobile. They also service this area just fine. In terms of connectivity, again, there doesn't really seem to be any significant benefit to as somebody who's used the service. I don't think there'd be any improvement over what was already here. There's lots of other options for mobile work, telecommunication, Starlink being one of those resources that would probably offer a more competitive value to that. But there's definitely access and connectivity for us here. I know that, again, the health concern can't be considered in this. However, in just a little bit of the research that we've done, I do see that the Westland Wilsonville School District had banned the towers on all of their properties. And, I haven't had the time to go into deeper detail as to what was their motivation. But we are located, there's a grade school 1.03 miles from the proposed building site. And I don't know if anyone from the school board has been consulted, or if there's been any, input from them as to the proximity, there, and because at least just to see what, why Westland as a whole, Westland Wilsonville as a whole district would make this ban, and if that concern might also be shared by the school board here.
But the issue, again, I can't consider health effects. They've decided not to allow to lease their properties for these facilities, which is their choice. And
Okay,
Clackamas County school districts could do that as well. But
that's fair
I
enough.
don't
And
think the
that's
county
not-
could adopt an overall ban because they have to provide coverage or allow coverage to be
Yeah,
approved.
got it. And then, the other thing would be, again, I don't believe that, if Barbara's letter is correct, one of our signatures was on that letter. The neighbors that we have spoken to, are just by and large not in support of this project. It doesn't really seem to be in this community's interest, with the exception of the one individual so far who's voiced support. But again, the community at large, just on a general basis, does not seem to be interested in having this put in here. If we were, the closer we were to that, it would be a factor in our property values. I personally know people that would not purchase the property again for whatever reason, whether it's health or otherwise. It would be something that would even prompt me to consider finding the sale of a property if I was in a closer proximity to that. So I do believe it would affect our property values. I don't think necessarily people are looking to move near a cell phone tower for connectivity because of just how prolific it is in general. And finally, well, I think that's what I have now. I do have one question though, just in terms of, I do feel this kind of came up fairly quickly. I think we were notified about a week and a half ago of this. I haven't really had time to, look into the process. In terms of extending the window where we can submit testimony, my understanding is we have more time. We can write a letter. We could possibly just get a broader community response to this. I do feel like we've been a little, it's kind of been sprung on us, and it would be just better. I would like to have more time to talk.
I am going to hold the record open for that purpose. What I'm likely to do is hold it open for a period. I'll decide what that period will be for everybody to submit new testimony and evidence. So the county can submit the conditions of approval that they've suggested, revised conditions. The applicant can provide response to the monopole engineering that they've discussed. Neighbors can provide anything else they want to provide. And if the applicant wants to, they can respond to these concerns that have been raised today. Then I'll hold it open for another period for everybody to respond. So anybody can respond to the applicant's engineering response and post conditions or whatever else is submitted. Staff can respond to the neighbors. Then a final week for the applicant alone to submit a final written argument without any new evidence, which is required by state law. So I will give you specific dates and times at the end of the hearing once, because the time factor is primarily the applicant's engineering, because that always takes time. So it would be a minimum of a week for everybody for the open record periods. Each open record period would be a week minimum. Beyond that, I'll consider.
All right, to answer Mike's question. Thank you.
Thank you. And just generally, I understand that the neighborhood opposition, but that alone is not something I can consider. As I noted, the only issue I can consider is whether it does or doesn't comply with the approval criteria adopted by the code or set out in the code.
Certainly.
Thank you. Mr. and Mrs. Brown, your raised hand has gone away again. I thought you wanted to testify. If you don't, that's fine. I just want to give you the chance. Looks like staff has unmuted you, so if you want to testify, now's the time. But if your issues have been addressed, that's fine. And they are not they're not unmuting themselves, so I'm assuming they haven't. And I don't have any other raised hands, but I'm going to pause for a moment. Just Stephanie's phone that's raised their hand, and looks like you're unmuted. You'll need to unmute yourself. That you're on your, there you go.
Sorry, I thought I did. Can you hear me now?
Not a problem.
Can you turn down? Sorry, yes, hello, I'm Stephanie's phone. I'm Stephanie Houston, and my husband, Charles Willing. Our address is 22333 South Mint Lake Road. We're down the hill a little bit.
Can I, Mintz, M-I-N-Z or N-T-Z or?
Just Mint, like M-I-N-T. Mint
It's
Lake.
Mint, thank you.
Yes, Mint, you're welcome.
Mint Lake Road?
Right, Mint Lake Road. We're just down the
Okay.
road from Steiner,
Okay, thank you.
a little
Wanted to make
ways.
sure I got it right.
Oh, you're welcome. I just wanted to add my opposition, and I know you've already heard from, we are also one of the couples that signed Barbara's letter, and I know you only have certain things that you're taking into consideration. I feel like it is a crime against humanity that you can't look at health concerns and that those aren't being more justified and researched, which I'm sure is kind of purposeful. But as far as the community goes, you know, I called 911 the other day because our neighbor's hot tub spontaneously combusted. And by the time I called, which was really soon after, they had already had several calls and the fire department arrived super quickly. So as far as safety for the 911 and the fire thing, that is not necessarily, it doesn't really hold very much weight because we already have enough service to have that safety met. So as far as when Brandon was speaking about the help to the community, there is much community outrage. So I wish that was also taken into more consideration. Everyone that we've talked to, and we put a lot of time into that letter, and people don't even know what to do. We just feel like we're going to be overrun here, and it feels really helpless that we, the people, don't have more of a voice with this.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Back to the Browns. Their hands are raised. And they're unmuted. You'll need to
Okay.
unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I guess just to let you know, we're opposed, and
I got that.
and then hopefully we'll get questions answered.
Yes.
Thank
That's
you.
what's next. Thank you, ma'am. Not seeing any other raised hands. Mr. Brown, can you, there you go. Thank you. I was gonna ask you to click on the raise your hand. Anything further, any response from staff? Go ahead.
A few things were brought up today. One was procedural in nature. The location of this property is located in the Redland Viola CPO district. And it was sent from that community planning organization over to Beaver Creek relatively recently. And so it is outside of the Beaver Creek CPO district. However, because the community is not that far away, Beaver Creek did consider it. And Beaver Creek,
You sent the notice to Beaver Creek?
I believe that it was forwarded by Redland Viola.
Okay,
CPO.
I just wanted to make sure I understood what you're saying.
So we sent our notice to the Redland Viola CPO because it's in that community planning organization district.
Yeah.
The heritage tree program that Clackamas County had previously is no longer a program. It's my understanding that it ended in about 2012. The historic marker that is on the property does not correlate to a historic landmark designation. So the property does not have a historic landmark designation. That is how Clackamas County identifies properties where the Historic Review Board need to consider applications. And this one does not have the historic landmark overlay designation. And so the Historic Review Board has not considered this application. If the mono fir is not structurally available to provide the service that is required, the county is not opposed to that late recommendation not being included.
Okay.
Those were the things that I wanted to address.
Okay. And just for clarification, it's my understanding that monopine and monofir are slightly different designs because one looks like a pine, one looks like a fir. So I've just been using the term stealth tower, stealth design to cover that. I think I can explain it in my decision when I address that issue, and so that everybody's on the same page, but just wanted to throw
Sounds
that.
good.
Thank you.
I used the term that was in the CPO letter.
Okay, yeah,
In
no,
my
that's
presentation.
fine. I know what you meant, but then the applicant said monofir, and And it looks like there's fir trees on the site, so fir might be more appropriate, but we'll get into that issue. Mr. Clower, or
Yes. Thank you for the opportunity, and I also appreciate all the feedback from everyone. We had some repeating things, and I mentioned this briefly earlier, but I would like to further just really reiterate that when we're talking about health effects on the tower, when we're talking about them not being considered in this testimony, I'd like to offer up the clarification that it's not that they're not being considered, but it's that they're being considered on a federal level. These are very important issues, and so I understand that people feel very strongly about them, and I don't want anyone to get the impression that people are not looking at this. It's just that it is outside of the county process. So that goes with the wildlife as well. The carriers are required to do an analysis, a NEPA report, which has been done to verify that there will not be any negative effects to the environmental area, as well as any health effects to the general population in the area. And again, that's being done on a federal level. It's highly regulated, and the site, as we've shown, is in full compliance. And as far as, let me check my notes here for some of the other things raised. The area of coverage, I showed one slide earlier. There's a RF justification document that we've included in our application that shows the areas that we would increase coverage for Verizon. And it's not just in the canyon. There's actually some area in the canyon which still doesn't get full signal down there even afterwards, but there's no population there, so that's not a concern. But there are several roads, residences, and public areas that will have increased service. And when we're talking about increased service, we're not talking about a black and white issue. Does your phone make a call once? You're talking about reliability. You're talking about speed. So there's a it's more of a spectrum of how reliable the network is. So this is going to provide an immense improvement over several areas. And as far as, let's see, I think those are addresses the notes I took down. If
do you know, are you able to address the question about whether you're going to take out the large oak tree?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
So the oak tree was actually brought up by the property owners when very early on, and they asked us to avoid potentially endangering the oak tree. They are not aware, and we're not aware of any marker. That was not seen in any of the visits that we conducted. However, what we did do, generally, we were using the existing clearing and road all the way up to the site, but specifically went around that oak tree and are proposing, that's one area where we are proposing some clearing so that we can run the access road outside of the drip line area of the oak tree, so as to not endanger that tree. And again, we haven't seen that come up on any official reports, and the NEPA report, the environmental report we mentioned earlier, didn't come up with any mandated protection on that tree, but it was a property owner request, and something that we're happy to make sure that that oak tree is going to be alive and well as much as possible moving forward without this having any negative effects on it.
Thank you, Mr. Clower.
Thank you.
I see a couple of raised hands. If you have procedural questions, go ahead and keep your hand raised. I'm not going to take any further testimony because the public testimony portion has closed. I will hold the record open for additional testimony, but at this point, I'm going to close the hearing for additional testimony. If there are procedural questions, go ahead and leave your hand up. So Mr. and Mrs. Brown, do you have procedural questions? Your hand is up. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Hi, I think this is a procedural question, thing. So regarding the heritage, stuff, my husband and I submitted a letter with
Uh-huh.
documentation in there about that heritage marker and what the significance of it is. And,
And it's your letter right now. Okay, there's a study. So I'm going through that. I don't see any documentation about you mention it, but I don't see any documentation like a map or historic sites. There we go. I scrolled past it. Jones David House at 18133 South Steiner Road. So that is on the Oregon Historic Sites search results list. I will give the applicant the opportunity to respond to that in the open record period. But thank you for clarifying that.
also, we'd be happy to show you where that marker is. It's overgrown with berries right now, so it would take a weed whacker and, 20
Yeah.
minutes, but
Okay.
we'd be happy to show you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown.
Uh-huh.
And if you want to submit some photos, you can do that as well during the open record period.
Thank you.
Thank you. Larry, don't have a last name. Do you have a procedural question? You need to unmute yourself.
Hello?
Hi. Can
Hey,
I get your address, sir?
Hi, this is Mr. Larry Franklin LaRue, and I live at 18024 South Steiner Road, which I would be the very closest to this tower and the circumstances on both the direction going down Steiner Road with this activity of to try to build it around the circle, and also the direct trail that goes all the way straight to the tower, where it would be where the oak tree is supposed to be and where this level is. I live here, okay, and I see monitoring of all the traffic, all the circumstances that go in there from people that walk. And also I've seen the bad parts where people bring in guns for trying to
Mr. LaRue, that's not relevant to they're not proposing to increase that. And again, this is only for procedural questions. You can submit this in
procedure questions number one, since I was listening to Mr. Crowler. Third party verification of FCC was said 3 times by him. I want to know who that third party person is from the CCC that claims that they verified the plan for this trip. That's one. Number two is it sure seems to me the way it was explained, 195 feet, and you're explaining how the trees are 125 to 150. Well, then you have to go higher. Well, you also mentioned many times how you went higher, so you have an allowance to another cell phone tower people want to come to possibly.
Mr. LaRue, these aren't really procedural questions. These could have been raised during the public testimony. You can submit them in writing and the applicant can respond. But I'm going to close the hearing at this point because these aren't just procedural related to the hearing.
Well, I don't think you're looking at the fact of have you been out there on the site?
I have not, because it would be an ex parte contact.
Well, the other thing that's important is the deer and the mountain lion family that we have.
Okay. Again, Mr. LaRue, this is testimony. It's not a procedural issue. You can submit this in writing. I will consider it, but I need to.
Well, I don't think you're considering anything. I think you haven't been out there on the site.
I am not allowed to because it's a ex parte contact outside the scope of the hearing. I have reviewed.
How are you going to make a decision without
based on the record before me, sir? So that's what I'm going to do. Thank you, Mr. LaRue. I'm going to close the hearing. I'm going to hold the record open for Mr. Clower. Mr. Clower, is 1 week enough?
1 week is enough. Thank you.
Let me grab my calendar. I'll give us some specific dates. I'm going to hold it open for 1 week until October 31st at 4 o'clock. Question for staff? Okay, at 4 p.m. for anybody to submit new testimony and evidence on any issues. That includes the applicant's engineering response, staff proposed recommended conditions, and anybody with response to what was raised at the hearing, and then anybody who wants to submit new evidence and testimony on any issues. So until 4 p.m. on October 31st for new testimony and evidence. 4 p.m. on November 7th for anybody to respond to whatever was submitted during that first week. So the second week is limited to responses to first week issues. And then until the 14th of November for the applicant alone to submit a final written argument without any new evidence. If the applicant wants to submit that early, they can, or waive it, just submit something in writing to that effect, and I will close the hearing upon receipt. But I will issue my decision by, let's say the 29th, because the 28th is Thanksgiving. I won't be able to issue it then. So I will get my decision to the county. The county will send it to parties of record. So anybody who's testified orally or in writing at this point, or who does so during the open record period, will be a party of record and receive a copy of my decision when it's issued. And anything that anybody submits has to be physically received by the county by 4 p.m. As Ms. Fields noted, you can email it to her, you can submit it, mail it, or deliver it, but it has to be received by the county by 4 p.m. to ensure and allow delivery time in your submittals. Thank you. That concludes our hearing.